So on Still and Still Moving, there's I wanted a degree of starkness to it because it's a love story, and there's always this sense that love stories have a certain kind of broody, shadowy sort of. And I think one physical challenge that we set up for ourselves was the entire space was sort of stark white, the floor, the backdrop, all the furniture. And this became a sort of graphic element. Then within that, how do you situate bodies and how do you situate the story? How does one see the dirt and the sweat and the fireworks and everything within that kind of really stark element? And because we're used to the blackness in the theater, right? So it became kind of with the designers and myself, it became then a sort of interesting challenge to do that. And it gave us the great opportunity to really lay bare things when against that white backdrop everything is, but also within that create shadow and darkness, and that that at some level is a kind of exposition that one is trying to see in the love story itself, and there. So it's in Still and Still Moving is a love story between two men, but the impetus to work on the story was never to, hey, let's this is a good time to make a sort of a political kind of play about homosexual relationships. I think that was never the intention. The intention was to look at kind of, I think initially I just wanted to tell a sort of fractured love story because my feeling was that often the way love and romance and relationships are represented on stage has a very sort of neat, almost convenient arc. And my own personal experience and of people that I know of love and of relationships isn't that. It's extremely messy and untidy and fractured, and at times you're moving forward and at times you're moving forward. So it has no narrative logic almost. Which is strange because we're always sold by the movies and by sort of I don't know, sort of self-help books or whatever. You're sold this kind of very neat arc of love, and it's not like that. And so that was one of the intentions, and that then becomes a formal element in the play. So scenes are kind of fractured, and at times you think it's progressing in a certain way, and then suddenly it kind of regresses or reverses. And I think that's also then conveniently allows you to play with the metaphor of movement and trains and that kind of and so there the narrative and the representation of space becomes a real kind of interesting conversation. For me, it was for me as a director, and the actors. I was very fortunate with that play to have the two lead actors very, very sort of actively involved in thinking about where are we, not just kind of within the space of this relationship, but physically in the space. And often how I work in the rehearsal sometimes is that actors make propositions. And I mean, different actors function differently, and there are actors who are very happy to be told what to do, but a lot of actors in Tadpole within a moment will propose, hey, we've done that and that works, but how about this? And I think particularly in how movement and physical framing occurs in a rehearsal, I find that really exciting because my visualizations are obviously limited, and I kind of set up a picture, an image, or a movement, and then within the moment of that in rehearsal, an actor will say that this is feeling this way, and it's making me enter this moment or enter this scene with this kind of intention. But if I were to do that, what changes? And that's always happened in our rehearsals, and I'm very grateful for that process. So Still and Still Moving actually was very exciting for me in this regard, not just looking at space in a definitive sense of the city and kind of interior, exterior, the metro, but also proximity between bodies and both visually on stage, but also in terms of the relationships in the play. And it explores different kinds of relationships between strangers on a train that can reach some point of intimacy, a relationship between lovers, relationship between a father and son. And so I'm not sure that answers your question, but
It does.
it's a bit rambling.
So this dialogue with space, both in terms of how it plays out in the narrative, space in this context where there is this place of the city, which, like you said, can be so many things, both visually and for other senses. And with film, it probably plays out a certain way how you create space.
Yeah.
Vis-a-vis the theatre, which has always tried to use set design as an idea, even if it is like you were sort of describing the idea of minimalism, like how you brought that in to space. Has it also pushed you to really move out of proscenium or redesign it, or sort of look for newer spaces to perform?
Yeah, to be frank, at this point, I think many of us in the independent theatre, certainly at Tadpole, we're quite saturated and maybe a bit bored with the whole proscenium space, not just design wise, but also in what it proposes in terms of the relationship between the audience and the performers, and that very clear line that it draws. I think since we've started as a company, we've really toyed with this, and I can think of 3 examples of times when we've really sort of tried to wrestle with it a bit. We did a set of monologues called Good Hats Godspeed that were written and designed for a little attic space in Delhi. It's really a tiny space in Connaught Place. It's proscenium insofar as the audience is on one side and the performers on the other side, but it's not a theatre. It's just it's a large room. It has about 3 or 4 lights, and it's really like being in someone's living room. And these were 2 very so we wrote and designed and devised these monologues for that environment, because at some level I think we wanted to really get closer to the audience. We wanted to really have them at kind of an arm's distance. That was the first time we really sort of tried to really sort of break this notion of stage or audience. About 4 or 5 years ago, we collaborated with a very kind of old and long-standing artistic collaborator, Anirudh Nair, who works a lot with Shakespeare, and we did The Winter's Tale, and we decided again early on that somehow spatially we can't do Shakespeare on stage with the actors kind of sort of barking out those soliloquies. So how does one redefine it? So we did other things, which is we did a multilingual production, but I think the big decision there was to do it as a promenade performance. And as a play, it enables that, because it's a play of 2 halves that are separated by 16 years in time. So the first part of The Winter's Tale was performed in the round under this kind of canopied, and we found this beautiful space in Delhi, which used to be called Global Arts Village and now is called Zorba the Buddha, which is a kind of sprawling estate really, and it's a kind of artist retreat, corporate retreat, that kind of space. And it has different locations within it. So the first part of the play was in the round, the second part was in a kind of slightly more outdoor sprawling lawn with, and this is the part of the play where we're looking at the it's a shepherd's feast, and there's a lot of music and dancing. And then there's this final part which is back in the kingdom, which we set half on a little hill and under a kind of small alcove of trees. And so spatially it was really responding to the architecture of the space. We designed it for that space, and it was a transformative experience for us as performers, and I think also for the audience to move through. And promenade is not new, people have been doing it for ages, and lots of folk theatre forms use this idea of a moving audience. But certainly for us who were used to being in closed spaces, performing on a stage, suddenly to really and to do it with Shakespeare, I think was interesting, because it was a reimagination for us, and I think for our relationship with the play. And the third one is of course Quicksand, which I really have been wanting to work, and I've done it a couple of times before, but I've really wanted to really test what working in the round does. And because of the material of the play, because there's a certain aspect of people's relationship with events as outsiders, but also somehow implicated themselves. I wanted to see what again, to go back to that idea of the audience proximity. And because perspective and doubt and where you are and how you see and what you see and what you hear was such a big part of this play, the idea of seating the audience in the round. We're also fortunate in Delhi now to have a new theatre space called Oddbird Theatre and Foundation, which is pretty much a black box, and they really leave it open to performers to use it in any way they want. And I think that has been sorely lacking in Delhi, the presence of alternative spaces. And I helped to curate and program one space in South Delhi, which is a little basement space. And the idea there also is this is a small space, it's very rudimentary sort of technical setup, but it's a space for experimentation. It's a space to really try things out, and I think that's really the survival on the theatre depends on this sense of imagination, because there are a few problems, of course. Delhi's very lucky. I mean, Bangalore's very lucky to have Ranga Shankara, but in Delhi we don't have a theatre that is financially kind of sustainable for sort of amateur independent theatre groups, and it's only now that certain non-conventional or unconventional spaces are starting to open up. So there's been Oddbird, there's another space which has been set up by a young theatre director called Nikhil Mehta, which is again a black box that's been evolved out of an old warehouse. Right. And I think that these spaces are really, really exciting to me, because, as I said before, to make theatre sort of alive and relevant for an audience, one has to reinvent what the experience is like for that. And I don't think you need much trickery, and you don't need to do, I don't think you need to kind of, sort of reinvent it completely, or to, somehow confound or marvel them with sort of spectacle. I think you just have to, at some level, displace, unsettle, maybe even sort of confuse them a little bit. And the moment the space of the theatre becomes unfamiliar to them, or what they take for granted in the theatre or they assume about the theatre shifts even marginally, they become more actively involved, even if it begins with a degree of discomfort that this is not what I signed up for, or I thought I was going to come and just watch something funny on stage. I think that level of slight displacement of expectation for an audience is crucial, and one of the most direct ways to do that is with space, I think.
So that leads me to this question of audience in terms of your dialogue as a repertory with the kind of people who've been coming to see your performances, the ways in which they can dialogue with you. How has that been for you? Like, what is the process? Are you happy with the kind of audiences and the reception and the idea of the play that they can dialogue with in terms of the context and the form?
Yeah. We've always tried to have a very sort of active relationship with an audience from our very first play. So when we started out, we would often actively meet people after the shows and talk to them. And because the theatre audience community is quite small, after a period of time you know people, so then they end up becoming familiar to you. But initially it was a lot of conversations with strangers, and because there were elements to our plays that were non linear, or sometimes a little sort of abstract, conversations would really be interesting. I've had wonderful conversations with people where they've argued about a particular scene or a character, and I've been standing, and then he asked me for clarification, and I'm saying, this is actually this is what is most exciting to me. Many years ago, we had a few of us had the great pleasure of meeting an opera and theatre director called Peter Sellars, who is an American opera director but works across the world, and he's really a wonderful mind and an amazing artist. And he said this thing to me, which I've re-quoted a number of times, which is that he said that the most exciting thing about the theatre for him was that when two people go to see a performance, and after the performance they have a conversation or an argument about it, and then one of them meets somebody else, and then you tell that other person, hey, I went to see a play with Deepak yesterday, and Deepak thought this and I thought that, and the play was about this and this happened, and there was this one moment where that happened, and then this third person meets another person and says, hey, Neel and Deepak went to see this play, and do you think we should go because he was talking? And then Peter Sellers says, very soon you have two people who have not been to see the play, who have no relationship to it yet, talking about it, and that really is how theatre lives. It's not just in the live performance, and I think this has always been an aspiration for us. If it's never really been to get some kind of uniform response, or some or this whole idea of, oh, if you thought that, then you didn't get it. I mean, I have a huge issue with this, because I think that being able to see something in kind of multiple ways should be kind of is really, for me, one of the exciting things about storytelling, is to tell a story to 5 different people and to have them respond in their own unique individual ways. And for that, we've had to actually talk to the audience a lot. And I think all artists, storytellers, performers are sensitive about their work and protective about their work. And so the amount that you're able to engage with feedback obviously is, or criticism, relates to how comfortable with you are with that. But I think that we've at least strived to be open. Right. Sometimes when you've spilt a lot of sweat and spent a lot of time creating a piece of work, you can be disappointed or defensive. I think that's natural. But I think that to be able to have a conversation and understand that the audience is that integral part of the performance, they complete the performance, right? Because they fill in the gaps, and it's them experiencing the play doesn't exist till they've seen it. It's nothing till that moment. And I think to be able to have that conversation is really healthy, because it keeps you in touch, and it really blurs that line between the maker and the spectator. And that's important again for the theatre, because I feel like digital technology and culture, for all its accessibility, which is amazing, and the things that it has kind of brought, given us access to, it also encourages sometimes a degree of passive experience. It's click, watch, next, click, watch. And I think theatre as a medium is much more responsive. I think that it doesn't even take a conversation with an audience after to know that. 5 shows of Quicksand that we had in Delhi and the 1 show in Rangashankara, the presence of the audience has manifested itself in completely different ways. So for example, night before last, there was much more laughter during the play. And I think Delhi somehow, maybe because the space was a little more claustrophobic and people were much more aware of each other, or maybe it's just culturally different, a different relationship to the play. I think that there was a different sense. There was more silence in the audience. So it was interesting for us to present it at Rangashankara and to have people laughing, even at moments of some discomfort for the characters on stage.